Hey, what's up? It's time to lay back and listen. Turn the world off and tune in.
Mengapa kau nyalakan api cinta di hatiku, membakar jiwa yang merana.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to Lay Back and Listen. This is going to be the third episode. Well, I guess I should call them chapters, but I kind of like calling them episodes. It just gives a different vibe. But this will be the third episode. I do want to point out, I made a post about it, but between the last episode and this one, there is a chunk missing. So I wrote this back 10 years ago, and this was before like automated cloud storage, and I should have had a thumb drive, but I didn't, and so I broke my laptop and I hadn't emailed myself that piece yet, so I lost it. And while I remember most of it, and I said I was going to go back and recreate it, I never did. But looking back now, I feel like that part of the story kind of gave Mari a little bit of peace through everything she was going to. So if you're interested in hearing about it, I may go live, or I might just make a short video. But let me know in the comments if you're interested in hearing that part of Mari's story. But for now, tune in to episode 3 of Monster Killah. Enjoy. I sat in a parking lot across the street from a club on the northeast side of town that was crowded most nights of the week. I was in a dark sedan with enough tint that I couldn't be seen, but wouldn't get me pulled over. It was only 9:45, and the line was already around the corner. People had definitely turned out for Prime, and me too, I guess, since the marquee read, "Happy Birthday, Prime, and bring Mari home." It was joyful and sad at the same time. I'd asked my mom not to take Prime's name down because I wanted the people that loved him to still come out. I didn't want to turn this into just my party. If anyone asked the promoter news to say that Prime was never mentioned, they just went ahead with it because it was paid for. Vivian's excited sobbing sounded so real, I shed a tear as she spoke to my mom. I said a prayer for what could have been and expressed my gratitude to God for what hadn't. I was watching to see who showed and who didn't. When a stretched limo pulled up, I never expected to see Prime unfold himself behind two of his partners. My breath caught in his wake. My throat started to close. I took a few deep breaths to calm my nerves. The killing part was, I kind of missed him. Hell, he looked good. He looked like the man I first met. He had a fresh low Caesar and a natural glow to his skin as though he had been on an island instead of jail. Although he didn't wear his labels all over him, I could tell he was wearing Gucci, down to the loafers on his feet. He was glancing around cautiously as usual as he moved towards the entrance. His security goons weren't far behind, looking as inconspicuous as possible. I knew them well because they were always around, but I also knew they would take a bitch out, including me. I was angry with myself for feeling Prime. He tried to kill me. I couldn't help how I felt, though. I loved him long and hard for a good minute. Bad minutes, too. When I parked in this spot 3 hours ago, I'd expected 100 or so people to show out tonight. At 10:15 p.m., the club is now at capacity. The bass was booming through the walls, and the windows were fogged and sweaty. I know grief can make you prone to move more quickly, drink faster, smoke more. I'd sat ultra still as my friends, family members, and people I'd never seen before filed in. Some with laughter in their hips and shoulders, some with sorrow stuffed in pockets and cleavage. I wanted to jump out now and show myself, transform like Cinderella out of my road rags into a party dress and pumps. But I couldn't, all because a week ago, the man I loved felt slighted on his B-day and came for my blood. My anger was returning. As the hours ticked by, I became more pissed. Prime was my target. I decided then and there to get him before he got me. He was not going to have me ducking, dodging, and living away from my family for the rest of my life. Corden Prime Jones is not going to have my life. Not with me breathing or buried. As my attitude made me more anxious in my seat, partygoers began to spill out of the club too quickly for my comfort. I hadn't heard any gunshots, so it was most likely a good old-fashioned fight. A fight could turn ugly pretty quickly, though, especially when it spills outside. I spotted a few of my more conservative cousins scurrying towards their vehicles. Then Prime swooped out in a flourish amidst his goons, some girls, and some club staff members. The limo pulled up to the curb almost at the same time they reached it. Suddenly, there was a screeching sound and the loud roar of an engine as a black Tahoe raced up the block, stopping in front of the club. The driver slammed on the brakes, licked 6 shots out of the passenger side window, and then screeched off into the night. People screamed, shouted, ducked, and ran. Some tried to break back into the club. Now, I knew for a fact that there were 2 detectives sitting in an armored maroon Taurus halfway down the block, but they never moved or gave up their position. The sound of sirens could be heard faintly in the distance, so either someone had called it in or there was some other emergency going on nearby. Bystanders began to regain their composure. Ladies fixed their dresses and hair, while guys dusted their slacks and adjusted their collars. Prime appeared unfazed as always. I made up my mind then that I would be the one to take him out the game. But first, I needed to figure out who tried to beat me to the punch, because there was no doubt in my mind that Prime was the target in that little show. As people began to pull out of the club and make their way to their vehicles, I started the rental and pulled into the street. I made a few turns, glancing behind to make sure that the undercover or anyone else wasn't tailing me. I was glancing around at a stoplight when I noticed the same stretch that Prime was in, pulling up to the light from my left. I inhaled sharply, mind racing. Should I follow? It couldn't be just a coincidence that finds us here, at a crossroads in every sense of the phrase. I thought back to a few days before, when Prime had exploded about his birthday, how he went off without even allowing me to tell him about his surprise. I thought about how often he went off on me without reason or rhyme and no explanation after, and without apology more often. As the traffic slowed approaching them and they turned on a yellow, slow as a bus, I saw my chance slipping away. They were still completing the turn as my light changed to green, and that was the signal I needed to go. I hummed the melody of the rapper Common song as I accelerated slightly to show I was in somewhat of a rush, not wanting to seem as though I was going to be following their vehicle. The thing about him being a limo, they had a lot of blind spots. I knew they'd be on point though because of the drive-by, but Prime was cocky enough to think he was untouchable. He would come for me, but he would never believe I had it in me to come for him. But I was coming. I had only been about a week since the incident, but I hadn't seen this side of town for months. Once I started dealing with Prime, I didn't come over here much, and when things got shaky, I avoided running into him on his side. I went to rehearsals and took classes downtown, so I didn't need to come this way much. I'd had a friend or two who lived out here from school, but we lost touch and they probably moved away. We were cruising on a straightaway section of the block when a limousine slammed on brakes suddenly. I applied pressure to the brakes and changed lanes and kept going past at a normal pace. The rental was tinted, a diplomat's vehicle, so I wasn't worried about being seen. I'd chosen this vehicle specifically. I wanted to alleviate any chance of me being spotted at the club. I was only puzzled as to what caused the limo driver to slam on brakes. I figured that I'd been spotted, but maybe it was something else. I checked my rear view and saw that they were still in the same spot. I knew where they might be headed, so I decided to beat them there. I'd wait a while to see if he showed up at his spot. If he didn't, I'd just go back to my hotel and plan for my next move. I didn't want to take the exact streets that we usually took to get to spot. For starters, I didn't want to be obvious, but I also knew that someone was there, most likely Pape. Pape had even less regard for women than Prime had. I liked him, but I didn't like him. He was cool, but he had his ways. I knew when Prime introduced us that he would be capable of doing two things without a problem: sleeping with me and killing me. He was ruthless, and I avoided him as much as I could. Prime didn't bring him to the house often, and most times he waited in the car. But if he went out, he was usually there. Pape was a watcher, and his eyes made me nervous. If not for their unwavering loyalty to each other, I think Pape was the one out to kill Prime. If for nothing more than a bigger piece of the pie, Pape was capable of anything. I didn't want to dance with him, so I parked in front of a 24-hour convenience store and slipped on a gray hoodie. I approached the house from the south side, walked about 2 short blocks, and then slipped into the yard of the house next door. When I was sure there weren't any exterior lights or guard animals, I inched closer and stood just behind the bushes. From this vantage point, I had a view of the street to the north and the driveway. I could also see into the house, an old Victorian style home that had been beautiful in its time. It was maintained but needed some restorative work to be at its full glory, at least on the outside. I'd only been inside once, but I knew that there was a home within the home. Prime had gotten a private contractor to come in and do the work without a permit. He paid a ridiculous amount of money for this, I remember. The contractor was worried about losing his license. Prime gave him money to get a different work crew, one less apt to ask any questions. The man had done all that work with just two other guys in close to a week. From the attic to the basement, there was an interior staircase configured around the load-bearing beams. Closets in a room would lead to another room, which would access the stairwell in case of a raid or a robbery. In the basement, there was a tunnel that led to a small shed at the rear of the house. This was the escape route. Prime had probably forgotten that I was home when the contractor came to look over his plans and to draw the blueprint from Prime's drawings. He knew exactly what he wanted. That was my first inkling that all Prime's business ventures weren't legal, but I couldn't deny how much I was into him at the time, so I let it ride. He had power, and it was sexy. Peering around the bushes, I figured that even if I couldn't see anyone moving about the house from here, that someone might be in an interior room. The only way to know is to find out. I laced my sneakers tighter in case I had to run. I made my way to the end of the bush at the rear of the two homes and chose a spot to cross over. I thought there was a guard dog, but I remembered that Prime had sold the dog to a friend. He preferred technology over temperamental animals. He couldn't take a chance on a dog being vicious towards him or not vicious towards an intruder. He liked live people on patrol even more. Cameras didn't have families to feed. The cameras and alarms would not defend his stake with their life. They were inanimate. So I could bet money that there was at least one person camped out on the property. Just as I prepared to cross over into the next yard, a pair of headlights swung into the driveway, illuminating the space just before me. As it pulled to a stop, the light beamed right across my path, bathing the shed in hyper white light. A second later, and I would have been spotted. I dropped down to my knees, breathing heavily. What was I doing? Was I trying to make it easy for Prime to kill me? I heard a car door open and then two more open and shut. I could hear the voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying from this distance over the hum of the vehicle. They moved towards the front porch and their voices grew louder. I could tell they were drunk, at least two of them. There were footfalls on the stairs and then more as they crossed the wraparound porch to the wrought iron door. Prime had a key, but he never used it. I couldn't tell if he was among the group still. Then I heard his voice. "I'm out front. I told you I was on my way. Why weren't you down here waiting?" he shouted. He never used his key because the house wasn't in his name. And if he was ever followed or photographed going into the house, he didn't want anyone thinking he owned it or the items inside. Prime was crazy smart. Like so many men living a life of crime. I always thought that he could have used his talents elsewhere. I'd expressed this to him early in our relationship, back when I was comfortable talking to him about such things. He told me then that he was dealt cards of a different nature. He tried to do the school thing. He'd even gone to community college, but then he was given a role that he had to assume, and all that fell away. He talked about it as though it was a past life. He said it was. I was glad that I hadn't entered that house. Just as I thought, it was Pape serving a sentry, and I did not want to meet him unarmed without a definitive plan. I'd be back. As they entered, I stood and made my way back down to the beginning of the bush at the yard's edge. I waited until I heard the door close before I stepped onto the sidewalk. I pulled my hoodie down and walked hard. As I reached the end of the yard of Prime's house, I turned to look behind and caught a glimpse of a curtain moving at the front of the house. I was being watched. I'm sure whoever watched had noticed that I seemed to come from out of nowhere. I continued at my pace until the home was out of view, then took a right at the next street to get back to the 24-hour store. I broke into a jog, removed my hood, and tousled my hair, giving myself the appearance of a night jogger. I sighed as the rental car came into view. There were people heading into and out of the store. An older guy was standing close by. I slowed my pace and tried to look confident. The old man smiled as I approached. He was missing more teeth than he had, but his eyes shone brightly. Ma'am, your car been here a mighty long time. You can't just leave your car like that, ma'am. Not in this neighborhood. No, sir. He walked towards me and gestured towards my vehicle. Now I watched over your car for you, cause these youngins out here would have cut out and you would have came back to an empty space. He laughed to himself. Thank you. And I'll be sure not to leave my car so long next time. I think my sister is out here somewhere, but I didn't see any sign of her. I'll be more careful next time, sir, I replied. Well, you know, little mama, a guy like me is pretty busy. Time is money and money is time. So you can think you could spare some compensation, or will this guard duty be on the house? He was chuckling as he said this, but I figured he needed it for some reason or another. I got into the rental car and reached into the space where I'd thrown some spare bills out of habit after I paid for my food and took out a $10 bill. I passed it through the window along with the meal I brought with me to stake out the club. He looked a little insulted at the food, but I quickly asked him if he could dispose of it for me so he wouldn't have to feel some type of way. I wasn't trying to make him feel bad at all. He was humorous, and I needed to laugh given the situation I almost put myself in. You take care, little lady. You out here looking for your sister. You need to be more careful and bring a friend with you if you can, okay? He admonished me like a niece or a grandchild. I will, I promise. I rolled up my window and put the car in drive. I made a U-turn in a now nearly deserted street and headed back towards the club. I wanted to drive past my mom's house just to check on it. I wasn't going to stop or even slow down because I knew for sure that Prime had someone watching it. I'd be spotted for sure. No, I was going to just drive by and peep the scene. Ha, I sounded like one of my old dance classmates. She was wild, too funny, and smart. Street smart, too. She knew all the latest dances and slang. She was so book smart, though. She could do the most complicated math in her head without much thought. Her parents made her stop dancing and focus on school. Her revenge was to hook up with this dude with the motorcycle who was 3 years older than us. I hadn't seen her in years since the night her father caught us with him at the park a few blocks from home. He made her walk home in her 4-inch heels while he followed in his car. She was so embarrassed. Then he grounded her for the rest of the school year. By the time school was over, they were moving, and that was about it. We talked on the phone for a few months, but I hadn't laid eyes on her since that night. I shook my head. It's funny what you remember and what shapes you later in life. When I started dating Prime, I realized that the rush of it must have been what made Chrissy defy her parents all those years ago. Prime presented himself well, so I didn't have to worry about those things with my family. In retrospect, I kind of wish his truth wasn't so well hidden beneath his calm demeanor. As I cruised back through the roads of my life, my childhood and adolescence, I thought back to a time when I thought we were happy and going in a good direction. We were driving down one of these familiar streets, just having left my mom's where we'd eaten dinner. It was dark out, and the darkness in the car that usually felt cozy to me felt cold and frightening on this particular night. The air between us was charged with something. It was usually sexual attraction and humor, but this electricity was angry and fearful. I was racking my brain trying to figure out what it could be when, whack, he slapped me across my face, momentarily stunning me, causing my vision to blur, my eyes to tear. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I tried to keep the car straight on the road. I used my memory to keep me on track. My mind raced and I didn't even hear what he was saying. He wasn't yelling, but he was angry, and his tone was forceful. I tried to tune in, but I was pissed, and I couldn't fight him. I waited until we cleared my former neighborhood because my mom would surely hear about her daughter fighting in the street. I pulled over behind a car, making sure not to pull directly in front of someone's house. First, I asked him calmly what his problem was with me. Didn't I do everything for you? I asked him. Before he could start in with his reply, I slapped the shit out of him. It was my first and last time putting my hands on someone I loved. I didn't believe in it. I jumped out the car, grabbing my purse and jacket, and proceeded to walk home. I walked about 3 blocks before I heard the car pulling up beside me. He asked me to get back in the car, and I told him to go to hell. I ended up back in the car after about a block of him following me, giving me his best Theo, Justine, Justine. I wasn't stupid even then, but I was in love, and love is a dangerous drug. I shook off those bad memories as I turned onto the street that my life lived on. I could see my childhood self running, skating, biking along this street with reckless abandon. I knew intimately the cracks in the sidewalk and just where to roll for the best jump over roots that surged up under the concrete. I jumped from the curbs between cars and scraped my knees more days than not. My mother was always saying, "You'll never wear short dresses. You keep skinning your knees up, girl." I laughed out loud. As I got closer to my mom's house, I sped up, seeing her car and porch light on. All the blinds were shut, the curtains drawn tight. No one from outside would know whether she was inside or not. I pulled to the end of the block and made a left. Glancing at my phone and looking closely at house numbers, trying to appear as though I was looking for an address. I passed a dark blue Dodge Durango parked in front of the row of houses opposite my mom's street. I could feel in my bones that they were watching the house, watching me. I made a right turn, still driving at a snail's pace. I was so glad that the windows of my rented sedan were tinted. I knew Prime wasn't in the truck, but he was just a phone call away, and I didn't want him to know I was lingering around. He didn't have a clue about my whereabouts, but doubling back here for this party had given me a little insight. Hell, I hadn't even known Prime had been released, but I knew he wouldn't be held for long. I took another right and then sped down the street. I decided to make my way to the interstate. I had to drop this car back at the rental place. I had left my vehicle in the airport lot. I was supposed to head back to Vivian's after the party, but I didn't want to wear out my welcome. Besides, I needed peace and quiet to formulate a plan of action because Prime wasn't going to be able to keep my life hostage. I just needed to stay focused and get this done however I was going to do it. I deserved more, and I was going to take it back. Just as I was crossing the bridge out of my mom's neighborhood toward the interstate, I spotted a figure slumped over on the sidewalk. Clothes were strewn about, somewhere in the street and in a tree near the curb. I glanced up to see a man throwing items out of the second floor window. I rolled down my window and the picture came into focus more clearly. The man was yelling obscenities at what I had realized was a young woman. My first thought was that he'd thrown her from the window, just as he was discarding her belongings. It wasn't far enough of a drop to kill her, but she could have suffered severe trauma. The street was deserted, odd for a beautiful night like this, but there were more elderly people than young on this block anyway. I cut off my lights and pulled over to the curb. I was about to open my door when I saw him emerge from the front door of the brownstone. I turned off the overhead dome light. I didn't want him to notice me watching. He ran swiftly over to the body, and I thought that he was remorseful and would maybe help her into the house and call for some medical treatment. He bent down and pulled back her hair. He whispered to her, but I couldn't make out the words. Then he stood up and proceeded to kick her in the stomach and chest. I gasped. I couldn't believe it. I hit the panic button on the remote of the key, hoping he would go back inside. He didn't budge. He just kept kicking her over and over. I was afraid that I was going to witness this young lady's death. I had to do something. I disengaged the alarm as he bent down again to check out the damage he was inflicting. I scanned the street and spotted a piece of 2x4 left over from some DIY project in the trash of a house about 2 doors down from where I was parked. I exited the vehicle and made my way over to the steps, which was only a few feet away from where her body lay contracted in pain. She was coughing and spitting, most likely blood, the sounds getting louder on the quiet street as I got closer. I was wondering why no one had bothered to call the police. I mean, we were outside after all. I grabbed a piece of wood and was glad that it wasn't too long for me to swing. As he moved to get up, I took 2 long leaping steps and landed with the 2x4 connecting with his shoulders before my feet touched the ground. I let the weight of the falling lead the wood and was satisfied when my efforts met with the sound of cracking bone. I pulled back and swung again, this time connecting with his side. I swung with all my might. I envisioned I was Hank Aaron in his heyday. The man fell over to the side, their bodies forming the letter L. I hit him again, trying to incapacitate him so that I could have a moment or two to drag her away from him. I'd be pissed if he strangled her while lying next to her. I could hear her jagged breaths. I knew she had to be in immense pain. I was so angry, but I wanted to cry at the same time. I hit him in the leg for good measure and then ran around to her. She was trying to choke out the word thanks, but I told her to be quiet and help me to help move her. I asked her what she could move and if she thought she would be able to walk. We didn't have much time. This wasn't a movie, but bad guys usually don't stay down for long. We got her onto her feet after some struggling. She was heavier than she looked, and I hadn't been training as hard. I helped her over to my rental and placed her across the back seat, which wasn't easy either. I was trying not to hurt her more, and she kept yelping in pain as I struggled to get her in enough to close the door on her feet. She could have internal bleeding from all the kicking, and I still didn't know if she was thrown from the window. Her lip was bloody and she was a little bruised, but the real bruising wouldn't show up immediately. I closed the rear door and ran back to get the piece of wood. I gave him a fast kick to the groin before I made my way back to the car. I jumped in, cranked up, and screeched out of the space. Luckily, I knew where the nearest hospital was like the back of my hand. Between dance injuries and a daredevil's nature, I seen my fair share of the emergency room. I pulled up in like 5 minutes. I was driving like I had lights and sirens. We were both probably lucky we made it here in one piece. I hopped out and ran through the double doors screaming, I need help out here. I found a woman lying in the street a few blocks from here. I think she was attacked. I yelled to everyone in earshot. The nurses sprang into action. One grabbed a wheelchair and 2 others ran behind, their stethoscopes flying. I ran past and flung the rear door open as the male nurse reached in to grab her. I told him to be gentle. She was pretty banged up. 2 more people came out. They appeared to be doctors out of their lab coats. There was chaos momentarily as they worked to get her out and inside. Once they got her into the hospital, they whisked her off to an area with a curtain. They asked if I was family, and I said no. So they told me I had to wait in the waiting area. I watched as they rushed in and out of her room with machines and more people talking and making decisions. I forgot all about the man I whooped with the wood until I saw an officer speaking to one of the nurses. I decided to make my exit then. I still needed to return the car. She was in good hands and they would contact her family. I would come check on her or call if need be. I forgot I didn't even know her name. I approached one of the nurses who'd been the first to respond. Excuse me, do you know if she was able to give them any information about who she is and her family? I asked. Oh, yes, dear. They found a cell phone on her and called her parents. She told the doctor that an angel saved her life. She must have meant you, honey. The woman smiled. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move my car. I'll be back to check on her. My name is Lacey. Okay, Lacey. I'll be sure to let her know if she asks for you. The kind nurse gave me a warm smile. I went out through the double doors and saw that my car had been moved about 100 yards from the entrance. Someone was trying to keep me from getting a ticket. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. I had forgotten I had left the keys in the ignition. I jumped in and peeled out almost as fast as I came in. At the red light, I looked back at the seat and noticed a blood stain that I would surely be charged for. I sighed. Oh well, there's a price for doing good sometimes. I thought about riding back to the neighborhood where I picked her up and knocking on the door and getting the guy to pay for my damage. I laughed. He probably would try to kill me. I had beaten him with a 2x4. I'd beaten a man with a 2x4. I couldn't believe it. I shook my head. I was becoming vicious like a tortured dog. I had turned. I was evil, vengeful, and relentless. What if I had killed him? What if he was still laying out there on the sidewalk bleeding and broken? How could I fight against violence if I was violent? I drove around the maze that his airport car returned and questioned everything I'd done since Prime had gone on a rampage and left me sprawled across the living room floor. He was a self-proclaimed monster. So what did that make me? Abusive, violent, and mean. So what did that mean for me? Was I destined to become a monster? Does violence beget violence? That's what psychologists say, right? But what if I was performing a service, helping another woman, man, or child? What if I was righting a wrong or allowing a person to see just how horrible it feels? What if I'm just killing monsters? I located the rental car place I used and followed the arrows to the return lanes. An attendant approached me all smiles. I had a lot on my mind and was not in the mood for flirtatious conversation, but I needed to inform him of the stain. I told him that one of my friends had a little accident, but I'd gladly pay for it. I batted my eyes at him almost subconsciously. My big almond-shaped eyes seemed to win him over. He instructed me to go over and speak with the manager, assuring me that the cleaning costs would be minimal. I went inside and spoke with the manager, telling him that there was a spill in the back seat and I wasn't sure exactly what it was. He advised me that it wasn't a problem. These things happen, and rarely do people alert them, even when they know it was their fault. He charged me a $50 cleaning fee, and I was on my way. I cut through the airport to gain access to the parking deck where I had parked my car for the day. I was exhausted. I planned on getting my ride and heading back out of town, but I wanted to check on the young lady I'd left at the hospital. I could have done it by phone, but I wanted to see her for myself, and then I could determine whether the guy who had assaulted her had been punished enough. I got in my car, the familiar smell enveloping me, making me feel warm and comforted. I sank back into the driver's seat and closed my eyes for a moment. I was so tired, mostly mentally. Physically, I was all right. Behind my closed eyelids, I was dancing in my favorite place, the private studio at school. It was constructed to be used by the lead to rehearse, but most of the dancers preferred to rehearse in the auditorium. I used it when I needed peace and tranquility. The music sounded amazing. The wood floor had just enough traction, but its polished oak shunning the light from the single window. The shortest wall was mirrored along its length. The longest wall held a teak rail for stretching. It was here that I danced some of my most inspired and intimate pieces. In my mind, it was the only place that I could retreat that was untainted now. I needed to dance. My body needed to stretch and more. It seemed like ages since I danced at Vivian's. Thinking of her, I started up the car. We had plans. I tried not to get too attached to her and to tempted now not to let her become attached to me, but it was difficult. She was like a little sister to me already. It felt natural. I could tell that she told me things that she confided to no one else. Still, I needed to speak with her because I wouldn't be able to visit long or often after this was over. The good thing was her home offered the type of peace that I needed, and the studio put in by her mother in hopes that Vivian would dance was more than an added bonus. We'll see. I pulled up to the garage attendant and presented my ticket. There was something so familiar about her that I didn't even realize that she was waiting for my money. She repeated the total with a little attitude, and memories flooded back. I dug the money out of my purse, and as I handed it over, I screamed with a huge smile plastered on my face. Chrissy, girl, is that you? I was just thinking about you earlier this evening. The attendant shook her head no and pressed the button for my gate's arm to raise. I was confused. I was sure this was my friend Chrissy, from the mannerisms to the speech. I pulled through the gate and put the car in park, turning on my hazards. I got out of the car and approached the booth. Christian Dunlap, I know that is you, I said, both angry and confused. What is your problem? Why are you acting like you don't know me? It's Mari. The girl that I was certain was my old friend turned away from the window and spat, Bitch, I don't know you, so please get back into your car and go before I call security over here. I did not say another word, although there was plenty on my tongue. But I did not need security, or worse, still, the police being called over nothing. I had too much going on. I turned abruptly, jumped in my car, and sped out. I would get to the bottom of that another day. I knew I wasn't
Wait, before you
mistaken,
go,
but
before
there
you go.
must have been a reason
Did you
for her
click
to
the like
pretend to
button?
not
Did
know
you
me
subscribe?
or for her to have
Did you
forgotten.
share?
I arrived back at the
It's
hospital after
free.
stopping for a good
And I
meal
know you hear
and a
it all the
quick nap
time,
in the
but
parking lot. The sign
just do
said
it.
visiting hours were long
Love you.
over, but that didn't stop me. I walked up to the nurse's station, which was deserted. I heard my name being called behind me and was met by the smiling face of the nurse who'd helped me when we first came in. Hello, Lacey. I see you made it back. She asked about you several times. They moved her to a room not long after you left. Once one of our volunteers recognized her. Recognized her? She's been here before? This has happened before? I was getting agitated. No, no, dear. You don't know. You didn't realize. Oh dear. Honey, she's famous. A budding actress and the daughter of a well-known actor. She was on that show all the kids love. I really had no clue what she was talking about. I rarely watch TV, and I didn't follow much except for music and news. I like to read true crime stories, but I rarely had time. I got nervous immediately, wondering if the man who had assaulted her was famous as well. This was getting out of hand. Come on, dear, the nurse said, drawing me out of my stressful thoughts. She probably will like to see you if she's awake. Let's go and take a peek. We rode up to the ninth floor. It was an intensive care unit, but the nurse explained on the way up that she was not that bad off thanks to me. Her words, not mine. The reason she was here was because of the relative quiet and the ultra private rooms, plus the fact that the only people who would really be able to identify her were the nurses. The rooms were private, so there was no family with prying eyes and camera phones. When we reached her room, there was a security guard sitting just inside the door. The nurse gestured that it was okay and led me to the bedside of the young woman. She was resting, and I decided that I would wait until she woke up. I pulled up a chair and motioned to the nurse that I would wait here until she awakened. Luckily for me, the chair was leather, and if I leaned back, it reclined. This was all right, I thought to myself. The nurse brought a blanket for me and a pillow. I guess she figured I would be here for at least part of the night. I got comfy as I could and closed my eyes. Being nowhere was comforting in and of itself. No one had a clue where I was. My eyes flew open and I whipped out my cell phone. I emailed my mother a quick hello just so she would know I was safe. Then I settled back in, curious about the young lady who lay before me in a sedated, induced slumber. I began to drift off myself, dreaming of an adagio. I awakened suddenly, blinked several times, squinting in the stifled sunlight that seeped through the cracks in the shade, the color of slate, the same as the walls. Slowly, the memory of where I was returned as I dusted sleep from the corners of my mind. I opened my eyes fully to the sight of a gorgeous young girl sitting up in bed eating cheese, eggs, and toast, watching SpongeBob. She appeared to be about 14, but I knew just from the circumstances surrounding last night that she was at least a little older. She noticed me shifting and smiled. You seem to be sleeping so well, I didn't want to wake you or anything, she said with a grin. She seemed to be okay. Thank you. I guess I did need some rest, but didn't expect to spend the night here. It's pretty early, though, right? Early, she laughed, again, this time wincing in pain. Hell no, it's like 11 o'clock. I made sure that the nurses didn't disturb you when they came to check on me. The doctors, the doctor was doing his rounds and had like 6 interns with him. I made them wait outside. I signed a few autographs to appease their egos. I really appreciate it. I've had an eventful couple of days, I sighed. Well, I need to be getting on my way. I just wanted to check on you and make sure you were okay. You really scared me last night. You lost a lot of blood and you couldn't tell me your name or anything. She interrupted me. So you didn't know who I was when you helped me? No, I only saw you slumped over on the sidewalk and then the guy came out. No, I didn't know who you were or anything. I stopped recounting the events of last night because I wasn't sure just how much she remembered or wanted to rehash. Wow. I began to gather up the blanket and fold it up neatly, although I knew it'd just end up in a bin for laundry. I stood, moved the chair back, and slid my crossbody bag over my shoulder. I went over to the bed and whispered to her, "Don't go back. Whatever you do, whoever he was, don't go back." Then I turned to walk away. She grabbed my hand. "Please wait. My name is Lillian Pearson. I'm an actress. I was with that guy for a few months while I was out here shooting a movie. He started getting controlling, trying to tell me where to be and who to be around. I withdrew from him and started hanging out more. I told him I was leaving, getting a hotel. He went ballistic. Next thing I knew, he was throwing my stuff out the window. When I grabbed up my stuff, he lunged at me. He shook me, punched me in my mouth and stomach. I screamed. When he let me go, I ran outside. He came out and knocked me to the ground. I couldn't move. He left me. I thought he was going to get help. I could hear stuff falling around me. I was thinking that he was trying to hit me. I was so dizzy, but I wasn't really hurt. I think he had drugged me right before I got ready to go out. When he came back and put his hand around my throat, I just knew that I was going to die. He told me I was the worst thing that ever happened to him. He said that if he could, he would take back the moment that he met me, the day I came to town, the day I was born. I didn't cry though, even though he wanted me to weep for him. He said he loved me, but I was trash. So he'd throw me away like garbage. I pursed my lips like a kiss at him. He flew into a rage. He stood up and kicked me repeatedly. He was muttering to himself, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. Then I blacked out. The next thing I remember is someone helping me, then nothing, until I woke up to being pressed and poked by nurses asking me a billion questions. Jeez, I sighed, visibly shaken by her story. I mean, I was there for part of it, but it's still hard to hear. It's hard to take it through someone else's voice, remembering all their emotion and hurt comes through. I sat back down. So, I wanted to thank you, I hope you won't be offended by this gift because I feel like you saved my life. This could have ended so differently. I know this now. I have to give you cash as a gift because I don't want this transaction detected by my attorney. I also have someone that wants to meet you, but he's in Atlanta. I could fly you down if you wanted. She looked at me. I must have had a shocked expression on my face because she laughed at herself, apologizing. I'm sorry. I'm so used to being around people who live the way that I do that I forget sometimes. You probably have to work or something. I shook my head. Lillian, I really appreciate everything you're trying to do, but I don't know about going out of state to meet a stranger, I explained. She motioned to the security guard whose quiet presence had almost been forgotten. He came over with a medium-sized hobo bag. She handed me the bag and squeezed my hand. Thank you so much, Lacey. I hope you will consider going to Atlanta. This friend of mine is really good people, and he would love to meet you. I talked to him this morning. He travels a lot, but he will be there for a few more days. After that, he will be out of the country for a month. You could always go in a month, but I think that it will benefit you to see him sooner than later. I don't know what's going on in your life, but I know that there's something going on. You kind of talked in your sleep, and besides, what woman jumps out and hopes another woman that's being assaulted? Trust your gut. I owe you so much. This money is nothing. Life is everything. DP would be a good person to know if you're going to make a habit of jumping out on guys. I nodded. She was right. I mean, when would I be free to just jet out? But I didn't want to fly. Too much attention. I drive down. It would give me time to think about it. She told me the bag was mine to keep, along with its contents in their entirety. She wrote down her cell phone number and told me to call her. She would be in the hospital for a few more days, but wanted to talk to me soon, whether I went to DP's or not. She wrote down his address and gave me some landmarks and general directions. Then she smacked herself on the forehead, which caused her to cringe. "You probably gonna use your GPS, right?" "Right," I chuckled. She was funny. "Are you sure that you are all right, Lillian?" "Yes, thanks to you, I'm good. I'll be back in no time. Just need to rest up so I can get back to shooting this movie." I grabbed the handbag and waved to Lillian. I didn't want to give her a hug because I knew her ribs were sore. I had a lot to think about. Should I take this trip? Would it delay my planning for Prime? Who was this guy anyway? I got into the elevator and put the handbag on my shoulder and held it tight. The doors opened and I made my way to the exit. I wasn't parked in emergency, so I weaved my way through the large hospital, following the exit signs for the visitor parking lot. I finally made it to my car, feeling more rested than I had in weeks. It was there, in the comfort of the car, that I opened the zipper on the handbag. I gasped. There were $100 bills rolled and bound by rubber bands. Without moving them, I could count at least 10 of them. My head started spinning. I had never held this amount of money at once. I knew Prime had this much money stashed in the house somewhere, but it wasn't mine. I'd seen it, but didn't possess it. But this was my gift. I dug out my cell phone and dialed the number on the paper Lillian had given to me. The voicemail picked up on the third ring. I left a message asking her to call me. I thanked her again. I wanted to cry. Between the 5,000 I'd taken from the house and restashed and this bag, I was doing all right. But there was no way I could ride around with this type of money. I needed somewhere to stash it because the bank was out of the question. I didn't want to go back to where I hid the 5,000 I'd amassed since Prime started to take care of things. In the movies, they went to the bus station and hid their money in storage lockers, but this wasn't a movie. And I don't know if the bad guys did it because it was safe or the good guys did it because it was anonymous. I wasn't trying to lose this money, so I'd have to think about it hard. I decided to stash the bag in the trunk where the spare was for now because that was about the safest place I could think of. Money and crime can sure make a girl nervous. I wish she'd given me something less nerve-wracking. I was quite thankful, though. This just added a little more stress to my already stressed life. Someone else in this circumstance would probably just take all the money and leave the States and go somewhere nice and live. I couldn't and wouldn't do that. The fact that I could afford to run from Prime for a little while didn't make me want to leave. It made me want to stay in my life even more. The fact that I could take care of a few things made me feel more secure and free than I had in a long time. When someone takes care of you, they feel like they own you. Even though the house and the car were mine, Prime was paying all the other bills while I went to school, so it often seemed like everything belonged to him. Even when we were lovey-dovey and all was well, he would promise me that I never had to work if I didn't want to, that I could just dance or teach or whatever. Then 2 days later, he'd be throwing it up in my face. That got on my nerves. I was so tired of him. It was in that moment that I decided to go to Atlanta and meet with this mystery person. Lillian felt she owed me, so I figured she wouldn't try to hurt me. I would make sure I spoke with her before I went to his house just to make sure that I still felt that way. Hell, maybe she wanted her money back, but I didn't ask for it, so that seemed like a remote possibility. This life was making me paranoid. Prime had told me that a little paranoia is always good. "Trust your gut, Ma," he'd say. My gut was taking me to Atlanta. Hold up. Before you go, click that like button. Drop a comment. Share it with your friends. Post it on your page. Subscribe so you get all the updates. And once again, thank you for joining me. Lay back and listen. Love ya.